In February of 1970, a student was sunbathing in London when a frozen body landed just centimeters from him with so much force that it left a crater in the ground. The body was that of 14-year-old Keith Sapsford, and he had fallen 200 feet. He had snuck into the landing gear of a Kenyan Airways plane, and he fell as the plane prepared to land at Heathrow Airport. The plane was on its way to Japan. His parents had taken him on a vacation overseas to satisfy his wanderlust, but it only made him want to travel even more. Just a few months earlier, his father, a university lecturer in mechanical and industrial engineering, told his son the tragic story about a boy in Spain who died because he hid in the undercarriage of an aircraft. His father explained to him the dangers of exposure to high altitude and the moving parts of the plane, but Keith's mind was set. He snuck onto the tarmac and he climbed into the open undercarriage of the plane, and he stowed himself in the same compartment where the wheel is tucked away after takeoff. He stayed there for several hours until the plane was ready to leave. He fell once the door to the plane wheels compartment opened, but police believe he didn't realize the compartment would open when the plane's wheels retracted. His father had decided to send him to a Roman Catholic institution that was called Boys Town in South Sydney. He was trying to straighten his son out because he kept running away from home. He ran away 3 days after he arrived at Boys Town. Boys Town had a reputation for specializing in troubled children, and he thought that this would help his son. When it comes to stowing away, death is almost guaranteed for people who sneak onto flights, usually by hiding in wheel compartments in the undercarriage of planes. And if the lack of oxygen doesn't kill the person, the freezing conditions at such a high altitude will. They also risk being crushed by the retracting wheels of the plane or falling out when the compartment reopens to release the wheels for landing. As Keith was falling, an amateur photographer was taking pictures at the airport. He accidentally captured the exact moment that Keith fell from the plane as it took off. He wasn't even aware of what was happening. He didn't realize that he had captured this image until he developed the photos a week later. On July 15th, 2017, 23-year-old Watisha Taylor was at home cooking in Greenville, Texas. She had family members over after a funeral of a family friend when she ran to Walmart to get some Pam cooking spray for a peach cobbler that she was making. She sprayed the baking dish and she set the setting spray canister on a rolling cart near the stove. After she put the cobbler in the oven and closed the door, she heard a loud noise. The canister exploded and it started spraying its contents everywhere, and those contents are extremely flammable. The contents came out through the U-shaped vents on the bottom of the can, and it caused burns to Watisha and it set the kitchen on fire. The vented cans were 10 ounces or larger, but they no longer make those. In a 911 call that I'll play for you in just a minute, you can hear Watisha screaming in the background while a friend tries to explain to the dispatcher what happened. She had to spend 2 weeks in a medically induced coma, and one of her contact lenses actually burned onto her eye, causing her to be blind in that eye. And on top of the burns, her injuries included scarring, disfigurement, and lung damage. She said later that she was still shocked that something that she used on a day-to-day basis just exploded the way it did and changed her life forever.
Stop! And let me see you! Hello? Okay, hold on right quick, let me get outside. I need a fire department, I need an ambulance. The stone's exploding in front of it. It's 4518 Borland.
4518 Borland, is there an apartment number?
My man's house, 4518 Borland.
What's going on?
She was cooking and something exploded, and she's got burns all over her arms and her face.
Okay, let me get you to the ambulance.
Come here, baby. Come here. Y'all got Aiden? I know, baby. They're on their way. I'm not going to touch you. Stop. Let me look.
Oh, my.
Hello?
Huh?
Yeah, I'm here. skin is clear. Hello, can you hear me? Ma'am,
Yes,
can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm here. Skin is peeling off her arm in her face right now. Okay? Come down. No.
Okay, where are you at?
She's at 2815 Borland. They're on their way.
Sir, can you verify the address? Because you told me 4518 Borland.
4518 Borland. She can't get in there, Lord. Because if she sit down on something, something exploded on the stove while she was cooking. All I know is there was a big fireball that went up in the sky, and she comes out running, said, I'm burning, laying on the floor. By the time she gets up, her skin is peeling off of her arm and her face.
Okay, just in case we're disconnected, what's a good phone number to reach you back at?
I'm Bishop Williams. I'm down here visiting. We're on the corner of Utilis and Borland. We're not too far from the fire department.
All right.
It's showing 1900 Utilis and Borland. Yes, ma'am.
How old is she, do you know?
21, possibly 22.
On March 8th, 2008, Joshua Maddox of Woodland Park, Colorado, told his sister that he was going for a walk. He enjoyed being in nature and hiking, so there wasn't much cause for alarm when he didn't come home that night. But as the days went by and Josh still wasn't home, his father called the police to report him missing. Being that Josh was an adult, he was 18, the police hesitated to file the report because it's not illegal to go missing if that's what you actually want to do. They did eventually file the report, and his family and friends just kept trying to find him. Joshua's father never wanted to move out of his house that he lived in with his now ex-wife, Josh's mother, because if Josh ever came home, he wanted to be there. As days turned into months, the hope of finding Josh began to fade. His sister Kate had always hoped that he had just decided to leave home to play music or to start a different life, and that he was okay. She expected him to one day return home with a wife and small children so that they could meet their grandparents and their 2 aunts. Josh had a knack for music and writing, so she was hoping that they'd find him playing with a band on tour. They didn't have any reason to believe that Josh had gotten into any trouble because he was a good kid. He hadn't given his family any reason to be concerned about his mental health, even though just 2 years earlier, his older brother Zachary, who suffered with depression, had taken his life. The death was obviously a shock, and it was very difficult for Josh because he looked up to his brother. And Josh became more of an introvert after that, but he did his best to be happy by being in nature and enjoying his music. Chuck Murphy owned a construction company and had a small cabin about 2 blocks away from Josh's house. The cabin wasn't his primary residence, so it would go unchecked for several years, but whenever he did check on the cabin, he noticed a bad smell. He would just brush it off and assume that it was just a dead rodent because he had found raccoons, chipmunks, and mice in the old cabin before. It was nothing new. So one day, as his cabin was being torn down so that he could build something else on the property, an employee made a horrifying discovery. It was the mummified body of a young man, and the body was cramped into a fetal position with the legs above the head, and the body was only wearing a thermal t-shirt. All of the skin on the legs was gone, and his legs were dislodged from his body. It was Josh, and he was less than a mile away from home. He didn't have any broken bones, there were no knife marks or bullet holes, but something about the scene just didn't make any sense. The cabin had never been searched, but even if it had, a large wooden breakfast bar had been removed from the kitchen and it was placed in front of the fireplace. Whoever searched the cabin wouldn't have expected anyone to even be in the chimney because of that. And because the cabin was isolated, even if Josh had called out for help, no one would have heard him. And according to the coroner, Josh's death wasn't instant, but how he died could only be speculated. The coroner, his name was Al Bourne, and he believed that Josh died of hypothermia because the low had been in the 20s. However, sometime before that, he did say How he died is only a matter of speculation, but we know he did not starve to death because that takes many weeks. So then you go down the chain and you have dehydration, which can take just a few days. And the other thing would be hypothermia, which could take a day or two. We have no evidence to say which one came first. He believed that Josh had simply climbed down the chimney and gotten stuck, so his death was ruled accidental. If that's all the information you're given and you do not look any further, that sounds probable. But Chuck Murphy, the owner of the cabin, did not agree with this. He believed that someone shoved Josh into the chimney, and this is why. Joshua's clothes and his shoes were found neatly folded inside the cabin beside the fireplace. But how could that be if he had gotten stuck even before he had entered the cabin? With the coroner's logic, Josh went inside the cabin, took his clothes off, leaving nothing but his thermal shirt on, went back outside, climbed down a chimney head first that had metal grates installed to keep animals out, and he got himself stuck while folding himself in half. That's what the coroner is saying, and that's what he expected people to believe. But if what the coroner said is how it happened, how did the breakfast bar get there? Why was it there? It doesn't make any sense. But even with all of these inconsistencies, the coroner was adamant about ruling the cause of death as accidental. But why? The police even tried to close the case as an accident, but the people in the town weren't having it. They kept telling the police that a guy named Andrew was bragging about killing Josh. Would you believe they ignored the tip? They said that that tip was irrelevant to this case. The guy's name was Andrew Richard Newman, and he had a significant criminal past. He and Josh had started to hang out before he went missing. He was allegedly heard saying, "Yeah, me and Josh have been spending a lot of time together, and we're planning a trip to New Mexico." He also said that he had put Josh in a hole. In 2009, Andrew was in New Mexico and he was staying at a friend's house. That friend, who was disabled, was found in the shower. He had been stabbed to death, and now Andrew was missing. Months later, he was arrested. He also confessed to killing another woman in New Mexico. But get this, the police had already arrested another person for that murder, and they still charged that person with the crime, even though Andrew confessed to it.